Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome and I'm here to break down UFC Vegas 82, which goes down on Saturday night, headlined by a grapple fest fight between Brendan Allen versus Paul Craig. Now, this episode of the podcast will be a bit more quick fire in regards to the breakdowns. I'm just going to spend a little bit less of time on each fight, a little bit under the weather, which is the reason why the release of this episode of the podcast is a little bit late as well. Normally it's first thing on Monday that I do it. But like I say, still a little bit under the weather. So rather than not doing it, I just thought I'd do more of a quick fire version. In regards to Base AI, the normal recap that we do every single week, the recap from UFC 295 on the weekend will be up at some point this week again. I'll probably wait till I'm feeling a little bit better to do that, as the predictions and the breakdowns is always priority. So yeah, there will be a Base AI recap from our UFC prediction software at some point this week, and that'll be on our YouTube channel in the Base AI specific playlist, which is youtube.com/MMA Play 365. Now, jumping straight into the breakdowns, as always, we start in the main event between Brendan Allen and Paul Craig. As I said in the intro, it's a real grappler's delight, this fight between two fighters who are predominantly grapplers. Paul Craig is the Triangle King. You know, he's come back and finished so many fighters, including, if you remember, way back when, Magomed Ankalaev. Paul Craig submitted him with, I think it was a third of a second left in the entire fight. He was about to lose 30-26. Brendan Allen, predominantly a grappler as well, but his hands have really improved over the years and he can now win fights just by standing and striking. So that's where I think that Paul Craig's going to come a little unstuck here, not just because of the striking. I just feel that Brendan Allen is better in every area. I think Brendan Allen's the better striker. I think when it comes to the grappling, I think it's more even, the grappling, but where Craig is dangerous is his finishing upside, and I just don't feel that Allen is a grappler that is going to get submitted by Paul Craig. I mean, look, you can never rule it out. It only takes one grappling mistake from Brendan Allen for Paul Craig to lock something up, but I just think Brendan Allen's too good of a grappler to get caught in one of those triangles. And then when it comes to the wrestling as well, I think Brendan Allen's the better wrestler, better takedown artist. So if any fighter's going to be on top, it is more likely to be Allen. And again, I just don't think Allen's going to get submitted with something off the Paul Craig's back. So I think Allen, like I said, better striker, better wrestler, better grappler. Because of the better wrestling as well, it means that he's more likely to spend time on top of Paul Craig than vice versa. And, you know, we see it often as well when two fighters are specialists in one specific area. With this fight, them both being grapplers, we can tend to see a completely different type of fight. So if we get a 25-minute kickboxing fight because they both respect each other's grappling, then I think Brendan Allen wins that comfortably as well. So yeah, I think it's a tough fight for Craig. I think Allen is just slightly better in every area, and that normally leads to a relatively comfortable performance by that fighter that does have those slight edges in every area. So for those reasons, I'm picking Brendan Allen to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Jake Matthews versus Michael Morales. Now, it's an interesting fight. Jake Matthews is known at this point to be a little bit inconsistent, but to be fair to him, he's been fighting high-level competition for a lot of years when he was really young, but I still just feel that he lacks consistency in regards to being able to put together like 2, 3, 4 wins in a row. And I feel that when he does get a couple of wins, he then fights up a level in competition, and then that's when he struggles as well. So I think that Matthews has got a lot of talent. He's physically gifted, he's athletic, he's very well-rounded as well, good striker, wrestler, grappler. But at times, I just feel that he just gets outmatched. And here against Michael Morales is a young fighter who also has good striking, good wrestling, good grappling, but he's very dangerous, and he does look like the type of fighter that will be consistent in the UFC. Big ceiling, in my opinion. I think he's potentially a future ranked fighter as well. And he just needs the opponents with a name value and opponents that are going to give him a good fight to be able to shine inside the cage. And I think that Jake Matthews is exactly that. Like, it's not going to be an easy fight for Michael Morales. I think he's going to be made to work. I think he probably is. going to have to use everything against Jake Matthews, both offensively and defensively, in regards to the striking, the wrestling and the grappling as well. But again, I just feel that Michael Morales is dangerous. I think he's got power in his hands. I think he could potentially hurt Jake Matthews. I think if this fight hits the mat, I think that Michael Morales is probably the more dangerous grappler as well. What will be interesting in this fight is if it's Matthews that gets on top of Morales. I'm just wondering if Matthews might be able to smother Morales and, maybe drain the clock a little bit and win rounds that way. That might be Matthews' path to victory here. But outside of that, I think that, like I said, Morales is the more dynamic fighter. I think he's going to be a little bit faster. I think he's got more power. His ceiling's higher as well, still developing from fight to fight. So I think it's going to be a really good fight. I think it's going to be a very well matched fight, but I do expect Michael Morales to get his hand raised at the end of the night. So for those reasons, I'm picking Michael Morales to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a fight that I've seen a few opinions on already. We've got Jordan Leavitt versus Chase Hooper. And of course, the opinions are going to come because, again, we've got two grapplers, two fighters that do lack in the striking, but also two young fighters as well that are still developing. Both fighters have won fights in the UFC, but also both fighters have lost fights when they probably were expected to win and being big favourites as well. So, yeah, it's a fight that I do feel is going to have a split of opinion in regards to the public, and especially because Chase Hooper's a relatively sized favourite in this fight as well. I think a lot of people are thinking that this fight should be closer to a pick'em, but yeah, is it going to be one of those grappling fights that both fighters are just very concerned with each other's grappling, that they just stand and strike? And I think in that type of fight, I think Chase Hooper's the slightly better striker. I think Jordan Leavitt does an okay job, and I don't think Hooper's like levels above in regards to the striking in this fight against Leavitt, but I do give the slight edge on the striking to Hooper. In regards to the wrestling, I don't think either are very strong wrestlers. They're more the type of grapplers that will get a hold of you and try and trip or maybe pull guard and sweep and reverse. They are very, very tricky grapplers. So listen, when this comes to the grappling aspect of the fight, I do feel, and again, I know it's a bit of a cliche, but I do feel that whichever fighter's on top is going to do the better work, just because, again, they both got good grappling qualities. So I'd be very surprised with whoever was on top to get submitted by whoever was on bottom with a defensive submission like an armbar or a triangle or a guillotine or omoplata, Kimura, or any other submission that's relatively defensive. So I think whoever's on top would be able to remain safe. But again, I think the submission defense on both sides is going to be enough for whoever's on bottom to probably not get submitted. So it might be a case of we see a takedown or two and then they stand back up and then the fight goes back down, or somebody tries to sweep or reverse. It's an interesting fight once it hits the mat. But outside of that, I think that Chase Hooper's the more developing striker at the minute, probably making slightly more strides in those improvements. So I think Hooper's a slightly better striker. And then, like I say, the wrestling, it's whoever gets that trip first and gets on top, I think will do the better work. I do like Chase Hooper more in this fight against Jordan Leavitt. I'm not saying I agree with the betting line, but I do think that Chase Hooper is slightly more developed at this point. I think he is more tricky to beat, and I think that's key as well. Like, I think Leavitt's less easier to beat. Hooper, I think for Leavitt will be difficult because, look, if Leavitt can't get the better of Hooper striking, then it's going to be on Leavitt to try and score takedowns and get that top side control and then control Hooper on top as well, which I'm not convinced that either fighter's going to be able to get a ton of top control time. So, yeah, I think Leavitt is sort of, he's the one that's got to force the action in regards to getting the fight down to the mat, whereas Chase Hooper, I think he'll be able to flow a little bit more. So, like I say, don't agree with the betting line. I do think it should be shorter, but I am picking Chase Hooper to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Payton Talbott versus Nick Aguirre. And talking of betting lines, look, this one just scares the life out of me with Payton Talbott up at like minus 550, minus 500, I think was the last time that I saw the line. And, coming in from Dana White's Contender Series, sometimes these fighters are juiced a little bit, minus 175, minus 200. But the chalk on this fight at minus 500, minus 550 for Talbot is very, very scary, considering that Nick Aguirre, I don't think is a terrible fighter. Is he a fighter that's UFC caliber? That's, the jury's still out on that, and we'll find out. And again, in regards to the ceiling and his development, but Nick Aguirre does have a path to victory, and that is normally very worrying when there's one side at minus 500, minus 550. So Aguirre's path to victory, get the takedown, get on top, and work the grappling, because Aguirre is going to be the better topside grappler in this fight. The thing is with Talbott, Talbot's takedown defense looks to be okay. He does make his opponents work for them, and I don't think Aguirre is this beast wrestler. So for as much as Aguirre's got a path to victory, I do think it's going to be difficult for him to find it. In regards to the striking, I think Talbot's the better striker, but he's not perfect. He's hittable. He leaves his head on the centre line to be countered, and he can be got at. But again, on the flip side, he's faced adversity, he's overcome it and won fights and finished fights after that as well. So I do absolutely understand why Talbot's the favourite in this fight. Maybe the truer line is like minus 200, minus 250, maybe even minus 300, but up at minus 500, minus 550 for a UFC debutant coming in from the Contender Series, that doesn't look like a complete package just yet. And again, Talbot's young, he's going to develop and get better, but from what I've seen, he's got some holes in his game. It's not a perfect game, and Aguirre is, his path to victory is there. It's going to be difficult for him to hit, in my opinion, but it's there. He has a path to victory. He's better in a certain area than Talbot. That's what worries me a bit, but I do expect Talbot to be able to defend takedowns in this fight, and he does look like he's got a reactive get-up game as well. So there are a few things that go in his favour, and like I say, he is the better striker. If he can keep the fight standing, which I anticipate he will for maybe the majority of the fight at least, then he should be able to get the upper hand. It's just like I said, at minus 500, minus 550, it's a little scary. But with all things considered, I'm picking Payton Talbot to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got an interesting one in the strawweight division. We've got Amanda Ribas versus Luana Pinheiro. And one statistic that I looked at for this fight in particular, and there's a reason why I looked for this, is I wanted to know the knockout rate in the women's strawweight division, and it's around 13% from what I've found. So women's strawweights, 13% of the time end by KO and TKO, which of course is a very, very low percentage. Now, what's interesting about this fight is I kind of feel that it's relevant because Amanda Ribas has lost 4 fights in a professional MMA career. 3 of those have been by KO TKO. Now, Pinheiro, yes, she's got more submission wins than knockout wins, but her last 2 finishes have been knockout. She does pack power in her punches and she's aggressive. So I kind of feel that it's weird to break a fight down this way, but Pinheiro has got a finishing upside here with the power, and Ribas's durability is, in my opinion, a little bit questionable. Now, from a skill set perspective, I think Ribas is the more technical fighter, so I think she's slightly more technical on the feet strike, and I think that she's the slightly better grappler in regards to the BJJ. Wrestling, I do actually put that down to Pinheiro, not due to the wrestling per se, more of the takedowns. Obviously, Pinheiro's got these judo throws. She's a black belt in judo and Brazilian jiu-jitsu as well, for what it's worth. So from a takedown perspective, the advantage goes to Pinheiro. Technically, from a jiu-jitsu perspective, I think that slightly edges with Ribas. From a striking technical perspective, edges with Ribas, although Pinheiro has got the hardest shots and Ribas has got the questionable durability. So it's a really, really interesting fight. I think it's going to be a close fight as well. And it's like, with Pinheiro, you could argue that she's, at least before her last fight, she's not fought anybody at Ribas's level, but she fought and beat Michelle Waterson-Gomez to a decision. At the time, I thought it was a bad decision. I actually bet Waterson-Gomez in that fight, but rewatching the fight, it was much closer than what I thought it was on the night. I still wouldn't have ruled out a Michelle Waterson-Gomez decision win, but I do think it was closer than what I originally thought. And Michelle Waterson-Gomez, just like Ribas, has been around the top of the division for many years, fought the best of the best, championship fights, all that sort of stuff. So I think Pinheiro has got either an equal level of competition in front of her in Ribas, or maybe even a slightly step down in competition from Waterson-Gomez. I think it's going to be a real, if Pinheiro wins this fight, I think it'll be a real breakout fight, because that'll be 2 back-to-back fighters that are very well thought of. It's not going to be easy for Pinheiro. I think Ribas is going to be, game throughout the fight, but I am slightly leaning towards Luana Pinheiro, just because, like I said, I don't trust the durability of Ribas. She can be winning a fight, get caught, suddenly she's rocked and dropped, and Pinheiro's got that explosive judo as well. She can hit these throws really quickly, really explosively, and yeah, I think Ribas is the easy pick to make from a prediction perspective, but I'm actually siding with Pinheiro. I think that, like I say, this could be a bit of a breakout fight for her. She's already fought a fighter at the level of Ribas, at least at the level of Ribas. So yeah, I'm picking Luana Pinheiro to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Uros Medic versus Jonny Parsons. This fight's going to be crazy. I think Jonny Parsons is going to be live very early in this fight. He comes out like a bull, swinging wild shots, big power in his punches, good forward pressure, good aggression. So Medic has definitely got to mind his P's and Q's in this fight. But the one thing that I think is in the favour of Medic in this fight is he doesn't necessarily have too much wrestling to be concerned of here, just because, you know, he's not fighting a predominant wrestler, someone that does hit like 3-4 takedowns per fight. I think both fighters here are going to get what they want, and that's a striking fight. And like I say, I think Parsons will be live early, but if Medic can just weather a storm and just calm that down a little bit, I think Medic is going to be the better striker, the more dangerous striker, especially moving forwards in the fight, the longer the fight goes on. So I think Parsons is going to struggle to win a decision. I think that if he does win by knockout, it's going to be early in the fight, which means he's got a small window of opportunity to get that finish. And these types of fights do tend to favour the fighter that all they have to do is just weather a bit of a storm early and then come into the fight, grow into the fight after that, when their opponent that's come out hard is expended a lot of energy. It normally favours that fighter, but Medic has got a bit of a touch of death anyway, so even in those early moments I think Medic could potentially land something that catches Parsons when his defence is a little bit down from a striking perspective. So yeah, I think it's a good fight for Medic, and I'm picking Uros Medic to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Nikolas Motta versus Trey Ogden, and it's an interesting fight this. I think that both fighters came into... Well, no, I think there's a bit of a difference. I think Motta came into the UFC with a lot of hype on him. I know I certainly was hyped on Motta from what I'd seen outside of the UFC. Like, he just looks an absolute beast. He's got power, he's got really fast hands and good combinations. But then it's not quite worked out for him in the UFC. Trey Ogden, on the other hand, came into the UFC. Probably a lot of people didn't expect too much of Ogden, a little bit unsure. Age and, you know, the fact that he is relatively, I wouldn't say he's one-dimensional, but he's very much a better grappler than he is a striker. But Ogden, I think, has looked fine. Even in his losses, he's looked okay. Like, he's a very difficult fighter to deal with in regards to his grappling. He's got wrestling to accompany that as well. It's just the thing is with Ogden, he's a little bit hittable and he's not as fast on the feet. So with Nikolas Motta, he can be got at. I do think that Ogden will be able to get takedowns. I do think Motta will struggle on the bottom of Ogden, just because Ogden's bigger, he's longer. I think he'll be more of a tougher blanket to deal with on top. But whilst the fight's on the feet, I think that Motta, his speed and his hands and the combinations he puts together are just lightning and dangerous. So again, I could see a scenario where Motta just comes out of here, and he doesn't necessarily come out too fast and gas or anything like that, but I could see a scenario where Motta comes out and really puts a combination on Ogden, gets him on the back foot and starts causing big trouble for him. But then I can also see a scenario where Ogden, you know, potentially survives a storm, uses his movement really well, because he can evade quite well when things get a little bit tough on the feet, and then hit a takedown when Motta's becoming maybe overly aggressive and looking for something that might not be there, and getting on top of him and submitting him. So I could see both sides of this fight, both fighters winning, but I am going to side with Ogden. More often than not, I will side with the guy that I do think can get takedowns and has got the better top game. I just don't think Motta's going to be able to get up easily from Ogden's perspective. I think Ogden will be able to control long periods on the mat, either win the rounds by that control time or potentially find a submission as well. So, like I said, I wouldn't be shocked to see a knockout from Motta, but I am siding with Ogden. I just like the wrestling and the grappling of Ogden. He's just got to use the wrestling. If he doesn't use the wrestling, he's in big trouble and he's probably going to get knocked out. But I do think he's going to use his wrestling. I do think he'll get the fight down, and I think he'll do the good work in the grappling. So I'm picking Trey Ogden to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Lucie Pudilova versus Ailin Perez. And I think this is a well-matched fight as well. I think both fighters are very aggressive. They're both decent strikers. They can both wrestle. They can both grapple. And they've got a little bit of a difference about them as well. Like, Lucie Pudilova is going to be the taller, longer fighter, the fighter that's more likely going to want to fight at range. And then you've got Ailin Perez, who is shorter, stockier, thicker, more power, will wing big hooks to close the distance, get into that range. Then you've got Pudilova that's better with a straight shot. She'll fight behind those straight 1-2 combinations. We'll mix in some kicks as well. The thing is with Pudilova, one thing that I've been really impressed with, and bear in mind the last fight was a robbery. Like, I hate the word robbery in general. I think it's overused. It's used way, way too much. But, like, at the time, I thought Pudilova and Edwards was a robbery with Edwards getting the win. But then rewatching it back, I still agree with that opinion. Like, how Pudilova managed to lose that on the scorecards, I'll never know. But what I like about Pudilova, since she got cut from the UFC and came back, her wrestling looks really much improved. She's now training at SBG in Ireland with John Kavanagh. John Kavanagh's like a 4th degree BJJ black belt, real high level black belt. You can see that Pudilova, on her Instagram is doing a load of grappling tournaments. She's also winning a lot of no-gi grappling tournaments as well. And you can see that SBG and John Kavanagh has changed her, and she's come back a completely better fighter. Now, this is what makes it close, because the old Pudilova, I think that Perez might have been able to get the upper hand against. But this new version of Pudilova, I think, is difficult to beat. And I think that Perez last time against Ashley Evans Smith was able to look great. I think that was more on the side of Evans Smith not looking too great and being completely outmatched. And I think that Perez is going to have a much difficult fight against Pudilova. I think Pudilova can match her with the wrestling. I think the striking's close. I think the grappling aspect edges to Pudilova in a significant way, especially with all the work that Pudilova's been doing in regards to the grappling. So I'm actually looking at the side of Pudilova here in regards to my pick and prediction, because look, what is concerning is Perez does have that relentless wrestling style where she is going to be more physical than Pudilova. I think she's going to be stronger. I think that if she hangs on her and takes her down and uses top heavy pressure to run the clock down and win the rounds, that's the part that's really concerning for Pudilova, because that is a legitimate path to victory for Perez. But outside of that, I think from a skill set perspective, Pudilova might be better. So it's a really well matched fight. I think it's going to be close. I think it's going to be competitive, but I am leading over the side of Pudilova. So I'm picking Lucie Pudilova to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Mick Parkin versus Caio Machado. And man, the camp of Mick Parkin at the minute must be absolutely booming. Made his UFC debut not so long ago. Got a really, really good win against Jamal Pogues. Then last week, training partner, friend Tom Aspinall goes and wins the UFC Interim Heavyweight Championship. Now Mick Parkin's fighting again. Like, this camp is on a real... This team that Mick Parkin trains with, the sparring team, because he is with TFT, with Andrew Fisher up in the north, but he does do a lot of rounds with the guys like Tom Aspinall and Phil DeFries, and the big guys. It's a big guy gym. So like I've said in the breakdown before with Mick Parkin, it's almost like the equivalent to Team Alpha Male that have predominantly smaller guys. This sparring gym that Mick Parkin goes to is all real big guys. So they're getting the proper work in. Now, Caio Machado, I think he's dangerous. I also think he's really wild. He's kind of sloppy as well. And I think that Mick Parkin, if he's careful and minds his P's and Q's, his technical game of just keeping things really simple, popping the jab out there, straight punches, not overexerting himself, not leaving openings for his opponents to find. I think if he just covers up on the wing when Caio Machado's winging the big bombs, I think he's going to be able to, take a lot of those shots on the arms, and there's not going to be too much damage inflicted. Then when it comes to the wrestling and grappling, I think that Mick Parkin's good enough defensively to prevent Machado getting on top of him, and that should leave Mick Parkin to just fight a nice, clean, technical fight, jabbing, 1-2s, just pulling away slightly with the numbers throughout the fight, not doing anything too crazy, but just having a real clean-cut performance. And that's what I expect here. I expect Machado to bring the bombs. I think Machado's going to bring the intensity, but once that all slows down with Parkin just covering up, taking it on the arms, and then landing his nice clean strikes, which usually that will take the nastiness from the opponent out of it, I think Parkin takes over from there. So for those reasons, I'm picking Mick Parkin to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is one of the best fights on the entire card, in my opinion. We've got Jonathan Pearce versus Joanderson Brito. Man, what a fight this is. Like, the one thing I'm going to say right off the bat with Jonathan Pearce, go back and watch the fight against Christian Rodriguez. The striking defense of Pearce was very alarming. Christian Rodriguez hit him with some hard, clean shots in that third round. Maybe Pearce was a little bit tired from the relentless wrestling, which he tends to do in most fights. But Christian Rodriguez was fighting up a weight in that fight, I believe, if I remember correctly. And I think that Joanderson Brito hits way harder than Rodriguez. So that is definitely something to watch out for, because Pearce has got to cover up. He can't just allow Brito in this fight just to land on him, otherwise he's going to get knocked out. However, he is quite durable, and he is one of those types of fighters that will fight ugly and walk through a war to make sure he can do what he wants to do. And what he wants to do is wrestle. And I love this style from Jonathan Pearce. Like, he will hit over 5 takedowns per 15 minutes. Takedown completion rate is around 50%. So what that does tell you is he doesn't complete every takedown, but because he's landing 5 per fight, it also tells you that his chain wrestling's okay, and you can see that in his fights. He will walk forwards and just drop at the hips of his opponents to try and take them down. If he doesn't get them down, he'll try and scramble into a single leg and complete a takedown. He's a very tricky grappler to deal with. Now, with this fight, how they match up, like I say, Brito's got every chance of knocking him out in this fight. However, the lack of striking defense for Pearce tends to be more at the end of a fight. In this fight, if Pearce is wrestling and grappling heavy early, I actually think although he slows down, I think Brito will slow down more. And I go back to the Bill Algeo fight. I think it could be very similar to that in regards to, look, Brito likes to wrestle and grapple himself. It's just, I think Pearce is the better wrestler, the better grappler and scrambler. So I kind of feel that Pearce is going to have an advantage in that fight. I think he's going to be the one looking for the wrestling. And I think Brito could potentially slow down, even though Pearce slows down. Once he slows down, maybe the power's taken away from him a little bit, therefore the knockout is less likely to happen. But the other side to this is Darren Elkins as well. Like, Darren Elkins is a very good test for anybody at this level. Like, if you're not ready to move up in the rankings and you fight Darren Elkins, he is going to expose you, specifically in the wrestling and grappling. Whereas with Pearce actually not only battered Darren Elkins, but he beat him quite comfortably wrestling and grappling. So I do think that speaks volumes. I am very, very concerned for Pearce in regards to his striking defense, but with the heavy wrestling and grappling, I think that might be enough to get the better of Brito early, where Brito is more dangerous, especially on the feet, take that striking knockout opportunities away from him, tire him out a little bit, and then if the fight does get ugly in the third round, maybe it's a case of, look, it's a little too late for Brito to pull anything out of the bag. So yeah, for those reasons, I'm picking Jonathan Pearce to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Chad Anheliger versus Jose Johnson. And Jose Johnson, I really like as a fighter, actually. I think that his striking's really good. He's tall, he's long, he's dynamic. I actually think he's not got a bad ground game as well in regards to his jiu-jitsu, but man, he just seems to have no takedown defense at this level. So look, if Chad Anheliger comes into this fight looking to wrestle him, I think he'll be able to take Jose Johnson down. Is it going to be one of those fights like the Jack Cartwright fight, for example, where Jose Johnson is just able to reverse position, being the better jiu-jitsu player? Maybe. It's just a bit of a risk. Like, it's a risk being taken down and not having too much takedown defense and thinking to yourself, oh, it's okay because I'll just sweep and reverse. Because if your opponent is decent from a jiu-jitsu perspective, all that's going to happen is you're going to get taken down, not be able to do anything, and lose the fight eventually. So I actually think that Jose Johnson in this fight, though, will, if Anheliger does come out wrestling, I do think that Jose Johnson will be the better grappler. I think he will be able to sweep and reverse positions, and I do think it could be very similar to that fight with Jack Cartwright. But if Anheliger doesn't come out wrestling, I think Jose Johnson's the better striker, taller, longer, more volume, more dynamic, got power in the straight shots as well. So I actually kind of think, although Jose Johnson has got this absolutely huge hole in his skill set and his game, I think he's better than Anheliger everywhere else. So I do think it's a tough fight for Anheliger. I think he gets outstruck. If he does go to his wrestling, I think he's going to get out grappled. So yeah, I think Anheliger, his path to victory here is get inside of that big range and just land something that knocks Jose Johnson out, which Chad Anheliger does hit hard, but I think this is a fight for Jose Johnson. For those reasons, I'm picking Jose Johnson to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got another Johnson, this time Charles Johnson versus Rafael Estevam. Rafael Estevam making his UFC debut. Seems to have quite a bit of hype on him, if I'm being honest. This is the type of fight that's normally the debutant against the UFC proven fight, where against the UFC proven fighter, should I say, and the debutant is like a plus 150 underdog, and he ends up winning, and then he gets more respect on the betting line in the fight after. But Estevam seems to have that respect already without this fight even playing out yet. And Charles Johnson's not an easy fighter to beat because he's very well-rounded. He's a good striker. He's got a wrestling background. He's a decent grappler as well. But also, what's key with Johnson is he's, for as good as he is offensively, he's very good defensively as well. Now, Estevam is very similar to that of what I described with Brito. He's got explosive power. He won't really put up a massive amount of numbers in regards to the striking, but he's got power in both hands, and he will look to wrestle and grapple. And for me, that seems more like a tailor-made fight for Charles Johnson, who's dealt with better wrestlers and better grapplers. Like, this is a guy that went 3 rounds with Muhammad Mokaev. This is a guy that went 3 rounds with Cody Durden. Now, are you telling me that Rafael Estevam, sorry, get the Rafael mixed up. Are you telling me that Estevam's a better wrestler and grappler than Cody Durden and Muhammad Mokaev? No, in my opinion, I just don't think he is. And sure, Charles Johnson lost both of those fights against Mokaev and Cody Durden, but he made both of them work very hard. He was in the fight for the majority of it. He showed good takedown defense against Durden. He showed a good get-up game against Mokaev. So I just feel that it's a very close fight. I think Estevam, with his explosive Brazilian nature, I think he's one of these new era Brazilian fighters that I actually really like. I just feel that the defense of Johnson and the fact that he only ever really loses to the best guys and that he's been in the UFC a while, I think there's some upside on Johnson in this fight. I do like Rafael Estevam. I think he's definitely going to have a long career in the UFC. He's definitely going to get wins. He's definitely going to be up there in potential rankings. I think that Estevam's got a real high ceiling. It's just Charles Johnson, I think, is just a really tricky fighter just because he's hard to beat due to him being good everywhere. So, yeah, for me, I feel that, I wouldn't be shocked if Estevam won because he's a genuinely good fighter. I think that he's more technical than Johnson. I think that there's elements of his game that he's just more mature in. But in regards to Johnson, like I said, I just think he's hard to beat just because he's this well-rounded fighter that's got as good offense as he has defense and vice versa. So, yeah, I'm actually siding with Johnson in this fight. I think that if you're hard to beat, then that's always a great first take on how the fight's going to play out, because an opponent's got to figure out how to beat you before really getting into their own groove and their own game. So, for those reasons, I'm picking Charles Johnson to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Lucas Alexander versus Jeka Saragih. Saragih had a previous opponent for this fight. Lucas Alexander's fight fell through a couple of weeks ago, so naturally the UFC made this. I think this is actually a really good fight. Like, Lucas Alexander is more of a technician. He's going to be taller. He's going to be longer. He's got deadly low kicks. I cashed him as an underdog against Steven Peterson, which felt good because so many people were shitting on Lucas Alexander, saying how bad of a fighter he is and that he's got no chance against Peterson, and that was actually the first time Peterson was a favourite in his UFC career, so I took advantage of the fact that Lucas Alexander was an underdog and that I just didn't believe he was as bad as what anybody said. And fuck, Lucas Alexander looked like an absolute tactical technician, a beast, damaged the legs. He scored knockdowns, like he looked the part. And against Jeka Saragih, what makes this fight so interesting is that Jeka Saragih is this little ball of energy with huge power. He's got one-punch knockout power. He has to thrive in bursting through the range of his opponents to land combinations, and I think it's going to be a real battle of the range. I think if Lucas Alexander can stop Jeka Saragih getting on the inside more often than not, he's going to piece him up badly, pick him apart from the outside. But if Jeka Saragih can get inside off, and the man is going to land on the chin of Lucas Alexander, and he hits hard, so it's going to be a battle of the range. But I kind of think that favours the taller, longer fighter in Lucas Alexander. The one thing that counters that a little bit is we're in the apex or in the smaller cage, which is going to be better for Jeka Saragih. But regardless, look, I think after that last performance against Steven Peterson, Lucas Alexander is very, very good. He's smart. He didn't rush anything in that fight. He knew what he needed to do, methodically took his time, picked him apart, and he's got a good head on his shoulders. And I think that the onus here is going to be on Saragih to really overwork, get inside, and I think that makes it a little bit easier for Lucas Alexander, who seems to move a little bit better and has got that range. So yeah, I like Lucas Alexander in this fight, and I'm picking Lucas Alexander to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. It has been more of a quick fire episode, although I have hit over half an hour again. But yeah, a little bit of a quick fire one. Like I said, feeling a little bit under the weather. The Baze AI recap from the UFC prediction software, should I feel better, will come at some point this week. And aside from that, look, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. If you're listening on one of the podcast platforms like Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Music, you can hop over to the YouTube channel, drop a subscription on there as well. You can comment if you want to tell me if we disagree on any picks, or tell me who you're betting on. If you are betting, I hope you crush the bookies. Unless, as always, you're betting against one of my fighters, then, of course, I hope you lose. We are on a 1 week break from UFC next week, so as always, thank you for listening, and I'll see you again in 2 weeks' time.